Hi everyone, it's Denise Brom. So excited for our next presenter and her presentation. Pamela's going to help us find our lessons learned and our growth that can happen through our grief. So Pamela, take it away.
Thank you, Denise. I'll just tell you briefly about me. For many years, I worked at a hospice. I've worked with families for about 20 years. I've also worked with grieving children and teens. I ran a center for grieving kids for many years and a grief camp. And now we were just talking about being virtual. Now I'm a consultant and I'm working very closely with the Compassionate Friends and Willow House in Chicago and other grief centers around the country. So I decided a few years ago to go virtual before all of this. And you know, I was on the road all the time. That's not the case these days, of course, but I actually did my dissertation on post-traumatic growth. And so I will, of course, be talking about post-traumatic growth. Some of you might not have heard of it before. I actually really enjoy when somebody is coming across this for the first time, because all of us go through growth and change in our grief and in our losses, but we don't often know about the actual construct. So I enjoy talking about that. And, you know, this really is about, sometimes people refer to it as gifts of grief or lessons learned. And I think that verbiage is personal to you. And especially in the early days of loss, the last thing anything feels like is a gift. So I do recognize that and really want to stress that everybody is different, and sometimes the gift might not show up for a very long time or years. But we do find often that positive experiences or sometimes renewed, or new insights, things we learn about ourselves, things we learn about others, things we learn about our capabilities, certainly with caregiving. We learn how strong we can be with having to care, for our loved ones. Boy, we learn so much about ourselves in that. And then also after our loved ones die, we learn even more about ourselves. I like to put images in just because sometimes the road ahead can seem very lonely, especially these days. And it might feel like you're alone in your grief, which is why I'm so glad Denise is offering this retreat, because so many people are struggling to find ways to connect. I actually think caregivers and grievers have always struggled with ways to connect with other people, because it can be such an isolating experience. But now with COVID-19 and with how, we can't get with our other family members the way we'd like to, and, maybe you were attending a caregivers group or a grief group prior to this, and hopefully you found a virtual group out there, but, we can't meet in groups the way that we did. So thinking about, though, post-traumatic growth. So I'll talk about some of the domains of post-traumatic growth, but it's actually a construct that's been widely studied. And it is really, Denise?
Yes, I'm so sorry. Could I give you a heads up? Actually, Barry gave me a heads up that
Yes.
Your slide is just a little cut off on the right-hand side. So I wonder if you can in some way minimize it a little bit.
That's,
or
I don't
maybe
have it on my screen.
It might be that if you take it out of slideshow, I wonder if that will.
I wonder if I pull up the PDF.
Oh, you could do that too.
Why don't I do that? So I'll stop share. Well, thanks for, I don't see that on my screen. So thanks for letting me know. I have a dual monitor, so sometimes wonky things like that happen. Okay, let me just pull that up.
I'm always impressed with people say, I have a dual monitor. It sounds something like you have a really revved up car with tires.
Well, but you can see that it's not always optimal because
sometimes the street is smaller than the big car, right?
I'll pull up the PDF, and so I have that on my screen. So now let me go back to screen share, and hopefully this will be better. Thank you for pointing that out.
And I actually didn't notice because the chat room was in my way, so I appreciate Barry giving us the heads up.
Okay, let's see. Are you able to see that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
looks like there's a little bit on the side here, but I don't see the X button for that. So let me just, then in this case, I'll be scrolling through my document.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, that's good.
You can see it better now. Okay,
Yes.
great.
Yep.
So let's see where I was. Okay, great. Fantastic. And so I was talking about post-traumatic growth, and I will go into a little more detail about it, but really post-traumatic growth is growth and change and even transformation that occurs not just because somebody has died or not just because we've gone through a difficult time in our life. It is the struggle with it, and it's the grappling with emotions. It's grappling with the pain. It's coming to terms with our shattered assumptions about the way the world should work. So many of us, when we're young, we think the world is very predictable and it's going to happen in this way. If I'm a good person, then life is going to be good. And then when we go through these difficult things in our lives, we realize that being a good person has nothing to do with what may happen to you. And so that is that initial crisis or trauma, which is the seismic event that happens. And for many of us, there's multiple events. It's not just one or two. There's multiple things that happen in our life. And so the struggle with our shattered assumptions are part of what causes the growth and the change. Okay, let me go back to, let's see. And so in the process of this, we are grappling and struggling with our new reality. And one of the things that we all know, but I really like to stress, is that people die, but our love for them doesn't die. And our relationship with them changes even after they've died. And that's something that I don't have in here, but it's called Continuing Bonds. And it's a fabulous book by Phyllis Silverman that talks about how our relationship with them changes after they die. And not everybody believes that. There'll be some things I say that I'm talking about sort of widely and globally, but everybody has different beliefs. And some people believe that when you die, you no longer have a relationship with them. But many people believe that you still, might ask them questions, or if you're planning to, Denise, you mentioned a car. If you're planning to buy a new car, what type of car might they want us to buy, or what advice would they give, or, any kind of new situation. I think about the pandemic and how many of us would love to talk to our loved one about what's going on right now and see what they would think about what's going on. And maybe they were, some family members that we would lean on, even if we were the caregiver, right? Emotionally, that tie is so strong. And so struggling with the new identity and the new reality and how your life has changed is also where that growth can happen. Really just trying to grasp and wrap your arms around the enormity of the loss. Oh. And then I talked a little bit about core assumptions and our core foundation being shaken, but this is something that even if we've had somebody else in our life die, that we're not insulated, right? We often think if we've survived one person's death, then we can survive another. Yes, that's true, but that doesn't mean that we are good at grief, if you will. Right? We still go through the pain because it's more about the person who died. It's about the experience, but it's about the person, and that person who can never, ever be replaced. And our new realities, especially in a caregiving role, our new realities, we might have much less on our plate in terms of all that we've been doing and around the clock care. But the hole in our life is huge. And the missing is massive. Regardless of how somebody died, the missing is just massive. And that doesn't go away. And that hole that you feel, it goes away, but all right, I'm sorry, I've also been talking all day. Let me mention that with my other work. Let me clarify a couple things there. The missing changes, right? And over time, the missing is redefined in context with your life. And that is also where growth comes into play, how our life changes as a result of the loss. But at the same time, you know, when you think about holding loss and making space in your life for that, you're holding the love, but you're also holding the pain. And we do it all the time. We do it every day, where we are able to hold both of those at the same time. But I will say that one of the things that makes it really hard for people as they're working through their grief, if the circumstances of how the person died is very unfair, and maybe, you know, I work a lot with people who've had somebody die, for example, by suicide, and they feel that that's just very unfair and unjust, and how did this happen, and what did I miss? And there's a lot that goes in there. When somebody has had a long-term illness, we often have a little more time to grapple with all of this, but it still, in some ways, doesn't make it less fair, right? Just because we've had time. So in case you haven't heard of post-traumatic growth, it actually has been studied in the United States out of North Carolina, a couple of researchers out of North Carolina, and they've done a lot of research around bereavement, and also when somebody has had a long-term illness like cancer, and they have looked at how people change as a result. And there are actually these 5 domains, and one of them is new appreciation for life, or of life. And I think that that is key for many of us because of what we've gone through. Life has changed, and our awareness of, in some ways, how fragile life is and how much can be taken from us without, you know, warning often. And just having that new appreciation for life colors what we do and how we do it often. Change in relationship with others. Now, what's interesting about this is that sometimes it's a very positive experience when the relationship that you have with others changes, but sometimes it's most unexpected. I don't know how many of you have ever had the circumstance where somebody in your life was either really sick or died, and people that you thought would be there for you disappear. They're gone. You don't see them, you don't hear from them, they don't call. And then other people who you might not even know that well, or maybe a family member that you're not that close to, they show up. And I have to tell you, over 20 years of working with families, that is a common theme, where certain people disappear and other people show up. And I often wonder about that. I think part of what that is those individuals' ability to cope with helping, right? And cope emotionally. I often think the people that disappear, it's not that they don't care, they just they haven't yet gained the skills or the ability to sit with you and your pain. The people that show up are often the people that have been through quite a few life-changing things themselves. And so they feel comfortable helping you, and that's why they show up. But so the change in relationships is huge. The other thing here, though, when we're thinking about growth and post-traumatic growth in particular, it talks about these people that show up that you never knew as well or you weren't as close to. For example, if any of you have been in either a caregivers group or a grief support group, you might meet people in that group who you're bonded to because of the experiences you're going through together. And you know, that's really important. And again, especially now, I can't tell you how many people I'm working with now that are really missing that connection. Again, kudos to you, Denise, for offering this retreat, because so many people don't have something like this. The other thing is a change in personal strength. And how many of us have said, wow, I never knew I could be this strong. Until I was forced to go through this, I didn't know that I could actually do all of this. And then spiritual change, interestingly enough about spiritual change, I actually find that this one out of all these 5 domains, and again, this is throughout my career, and even some of the research bears this out, that the spiritual change is probably the most varied. Many times when people go through a crisis or the death of somebody, their beliefs are challenged. And it's not unusual for people to feel like mad at God, or, you know, just feeling like if God loved me and God loved my family, if God loved my mom or my dad, this never would have happened. And our faith can be really challenged if we had faith prior to this happening. For some people, they find that their faith ends up over time being stronger or more defined. And then there are people that haven't had a strong belief system or strong faith that find that that's one of the areas where they're helped. One lady that I worked with for a long time, whose dad had been very, very ill, they didn't grow up with beliefs in their family. She said their beliefs were more unconventional. She never belonged to a church where she felt comfortable because her family didn't have, I guess, traditional beliefs. And when her dad was really sick, one of the things that she did was go to a church with a friend, and she found that it really, really helped her, and it helped her after her dad died as well. So that definitely happens. The other thing is, and I think this one's probably the most prevalent one that I've seen, is new possibilities and purpose in life. And depending upon how your loved one died, it's not unusual to start volunteering in an organization that, you know, maybe if your loved one died of Alzheimer's, you start volunteering for the Alzheimer's Association, or you start helping them through their walk, you know, how they have the Alzheimer's walk, or, you know, if your loved one died of cancer, the same thing, you might spend some time helping others who have had a loved one die from cancer. And often through our struggle, part of the growth is finding a new purpose in life. I often tell my story about when I talk about this, and a little bit different than being a caregiver. Both my parents died when I was in my early 20s, and they were young. My dad died in a truck crash at 49, and my mom died of cancer at 51. And so I never had the chance to get to know them as they aged. But pretty quickly after my mom died, so my dad had died first and then my mom died, within a couple of months, I knew that my new purpose in life, if I could survive this grief somehow, I was going to dedicate my entire life to helping grieving people. And so my entire career has actually been defined by my parents' deaths. So I definitely, this resonates, and this is probably why I chose to do my dissertation on post-traumatic growth, because I feel that so many people haven't really heard about this, and it's so important to have this, at least in your awareness, because there is so much growth and transformation that happens not only to us, but through us as a result of what we go through. And I mentioned to all of you that I've worked with grieving kids for many, many years. And I can't tell you how many kids would say to me, both your parents died? Because they might have had one parent die. And I'd say, yeah. And they, you know, they were always surprised that I seemed upbeat and friendly. And they were always surprised that I seemed to be living a good life in spite of it. And of course, I never said that I was, but just the way of my being with them in group and my way of being with them, we had a lot of free time, and they saw me as a carefree person, even though, of course, none of us are really that carefree. But for them, I modeled that both parents could die and you could still go on and have a good life. And that was important for them. Okay, let's see if I can get this to change. We all think about our life before our person died, or even before they got sick, or maybe there's more than one person in your life that you cared for. Certainly, most of us, by the time we reach a certain age, we've had multiple people in our lives who have died. And with each person who dies, we really do look at our life before they died and our life after. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's actually a reality, that our life changes that much when somebody we love dies. And I would say, especially if we were their primary person caring for them, how much our life changes. I also want to mention, with my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, we were their caregivers for a long time. And I got to see through my husband, his parents were married 60 years, and he was, I think, gosh, he was in his late 50s when they died. And so he had an entirely different experience than me. And I got to really see what a gift to care for them and to be with them in their last, really, we cared for them in their last 6 months for my father-in-law and about a year for my mother-in-law. An opposite experience to what I had, and an opposite experience to what a lot of the kids and teens that I've worked with. But I think I also mentioned right when I started that I had worked for a hospice for a long time. And so I was able to see families who had been caring for other family members for a very long time. And then, of course, hospice comes in at the end. But families, I don't care how old somebody was when they died, families do, and individuals often define themselves and their life as before and after. So I'm just wondering in the chat if anybody wants to talk about that at all, about how you see your life before and after. If anybody wants to.
Yeah, and I'll share what people.
Oh, yes, I haven't been able to see the chat.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what people are writing. And I wanted to mention something that really struck me in the early part of your presentation. You were kind of talking about what I would call almost like this rules of order for our life. If we follow the rules, then the life will follow the rules that are good for us. Right. Our good behavior then creates good rules where there is no trauma, there is no suffering, everybody lives forever.
Right.
And it's interesting to think about the death is this loss of the person we love, but it's also this loss of the rules of order.
It is, yes. The rules of order, that's a really great way to put it, because we think we can order our lives, even as kids, right?
We do, right? We think
we can order our lives if we're good students, if we're good kids, if we, as we get older, again, if we're good, quote unquote, good people, right? If we follow society's rules. I agree completely. And that's why it's so earth-shattering when somebody gets sick, right? Because wait a minute, this wasn't supposed to happen. And especially if they're younger when they get sick. If people are of a certain age, then what do we hear? Oh, it's their time, or the circle of life, or this is how things go. Here's the thing. Even no matter if somebody's 99 years old or 102, the pain is still there. Mm-hmm. And actually, it's interesting because I'm segueing, and I want to come back to the before and after. But that's actually something that I take issue with very gently with people and very politely. But we'll hear, oh, well, they lived a good life and they lived a long time. I want to say to other family members, be careful that you're not accidentally invalidating anybody's pain in the family, right? Because what if your mom was 95, but she was your person, right? And I'm sorry, but you're still going to be extremely affected if your 95-year-old mom was your person. And sometimes families and friends and coworkers can be a little insensitive with that and I don't think people mean to. I just think people don't pay enough attention sometimes about what they say, right? And certainly if any of you have had that experience, you can put it in the chat. But Denise, what else are you seeing in the chat?
I just want to add something. It's this idea that we always want more with the people we love. So even if they did live to 95 years, it's not enough. We love them. We want it to go on forever. I had that realization a few years ago. as it relates to my dad's cancer. I thought, oh my gosh, now I get it. You want more because you love them so much.
Yeah, and they're irreplaceable.
Irreplaceable.
They're
Absolutely.
irreplaceable. So it doesn't matter how old they are or how old you are.
Does not matter. Or how many years you've had with them. You always want more.
And, you know, and I really saw that with my husband. I really, really saw that with him. And I used to think, I'm just being honest, I used to think, gosh, he's so lucky. He's not had anybody, you know, his parents are both alive. And like I said, he was in his late 50s. And you know, me, I had half that time with my parents. But we all go through things, right? And we all go through losses, and we just can't compare in that way. It's not fair.
So there's a couple comments around the before and after. So Gail is saying, filling in the emptiness positively. And Jill has shared, I feel like a victim in my life in general, even before my loss. I felt like a victim in my life in general, even before my loss. Now I feel so blessed, loving, and confident. And Beth writes, before a parent dies, you're a child. Afterward, you're a grown-up. And grown-up is in quotes.
Yeah. You know, I want to talk about a couple of points here. For Joe, I would say if you want to share what changed your perspective, and then I want to go back to the last point. But you don't have to share if you don't want to. But I am curious. Were there some things that happened in your life that changed your perspective? So
from victim to feeling blessed and loving and confident.
Yeah.
So okay, Jill, if you feel, yeah.
Is that me? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, Jill, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Jill sounds like Joe. Yeah, so I grew up in a yours, mine, and ours, and his and hers and theirs. I was a flower child. I had a lot of, there was a lot of abuse and neglect and all kinds of things. So I kind of grew up thinking that the world was not in my favor and that I was poor me. And I was so happy when I met my husband, and he was so good to me, and we had so much fun, and everything was hunky-dory. And then he went to war and came home, and then he was sick. And so I had felt like a victim anyway. And then when he got so sick that I had to take care of him, and then, you know, many years later, I was still taking care of him. I thought, I'm so tired, I can't do this anymore. I was just so full of victimhood my entire life until I got some coaching. And I wrote my book. And when I wrote my book, oh my gosh, the perspective it gave me as I looked back on our life for the last 28 years. I love my husband so much, and I do not have any of that. It's just been incredible to me. It's been a complete miracle. I just love my life. I'm so grateful that I found the man that I did, and that he is such a hero, and he does not give up, and he doesn't resort to, you know, addictive substances or harming himself or living on the street or anything that he so could easily do because of his stuff. And so I just feel so blessed, and I feel so grateful that I can help other people too. So it's night and day.
Oh, and I really appreciate you sharing all of that. Thank you. And what I'm hearing you say is your perspective changed in so many ways, and how
exactly.
You chose to view yourself and your husband in your life. And I think that's invaluable. And I often wonder, how do we help people? You know, Jill, when you mentioned you wrote a book, how do we help people not necessarily change their perspective, but how do we help them see that there might be a different perspective than what they're living, right? Because, you know, when I'm working with kids, I talk to them about how if you're in your house and you're looking out the front window, you see one view. But what happens if you look out the back window, or if you look out your bedroom window, you see a different view? And adults don't often do that, do we? We don't often take the time to look out a different window and see how this different view and this different perspective might help us. You know, and also, Jill, your voice, you sound very light and upbeat and positive. And, you know, based on everything you've been through, people would certainly understand if you didn't have that perspective or that attitude.
Yeah, I think I forgot to grow up. I still sound like a teenager. I'm 58 years old.
Oh, no, you don't sound like a teenager. Your voice is just, yeah, it has a lightness to it. Yeah, yeah.
I'm pretty happy.
Yeah, that's good. Anybody else want to add anything to what Jill said or anything about change perspective? Is there anything else in the chat, or if you wanted to talk?
I think we're good.
Okay, and then Denise, there was a last point that you said. Do you mind reading that again? Comment?
Yeah, Beth's comment was, before a parent dies, you're a child. Afterward, you're a grown-up.
Right, yeah. So Beth, thank you for that. And again, I say no matter what age your parent was, or parents, depending, I say no matter what age. I know I certainly felt that at my age. And so many of my friends still had their parents for many years after that. But I've even noticed that in a way with my husband at his age, where sometimes he feels, and he told me this not too long ago, sometimes he feels sort of adrift a little bit. And I think that we can feel untethered when our parents die, because they connect us and ground us often to life and to the world and everything. So yes, I agree that we could feel like now we're an adult and we have to grow up if we haven't grown up yet. And often the other thing that I hear a lot after both parents have died, no matter how old you are, I've heard that people say they feel like an orphan. And I don't know if you've heard that, or felt, if any of you here have felt that. That's a very real feeling as well. Okay, I'm going to go along here. Let's see. So I talked a little bit about new purpose and new possibilities. But this is really where, and again, in the context of growth and change and for some people transformation, this is where we might actually change our career. We might go back to school. I already said that's what I did. I went back to school to become a grief counselor after my parents died. And some things that had been really important to me were no longer important. I was working in a hotel and I really loved the hotel job. Nothing against working in a hotel. My daughter works for Marriott now, but I thought that was the best job in the world. I worked with the conventions and I loved the planning and had a great time. But really after my dad and then my mom died, I cut my hair really short. It had been long. I told my husband, he came home from work one day and I said, I don't even know what this is called, because it was before the internet. I couldn't look things up. I had like a encyclopedia in my house, but I'm like, I don't even know what this is called, but I'm going back to school to help people who've had somebody die. And my husband's like, what? But I did. I went back to school, and that was over 20 years ago, and I've never looked back. And so it's not always that extreme where your entire career changes, but I've heard so many people where it has. But have any of you, and you could put it in the chat box if you feel like sharing, found that you've had new purpose in life where you feel like things that were important to you beforehand just aren't as important in the same way, and other priorities have emerged?
Yeah, it's interesting about the priorities, who you spend time with.
Yeah.
And what you spend time with as well.
Yeah, exactly. Who are the important people at this point, right? Who matters that you want to give your time to?
It was interesting to hear you talk about those who show up. So a friend of mine had a daughter who died when she was 4, and they received a lot of support through Willow House.
Okay.
He is someone who shows up at the funerals. That is a significant priority for him. So his daughter died 14 years ago, and he has been to, I'm not sure how many funerals, because he knows how important it is to show up. So that has changed for him, how he spends his time.
Because he probably looks back and thinks about the people who showed up when his daughter died, because especially when a child has died and a young child like that, people really are frozen in how they help. Boy, I can't even tell you how many families I've worked with, especially when it's a young child. People run the other way. And again, it's not because they don't care. It's because they just don't know how to help and they don't know what to say. And good for him for showing up and saying, I'm standing with you and I'm here with you. Yeah. And you mentioned that he's gone to a lot of funerals, so he just makes it, you know, if he knows somebody, even if he's not extremely close, he makes it a priority to go. Yeah.
Yes, very important to him.
And you know, we, in our grief, we do pay attention to who's at the funeral, and we do pay attention to who sent a card or an email, a text. We do pay attention. Often in our grief, it's a fog, so we might not notice as much, but we think back and we're like, who did show up for us? Right. I think of that now in this digital world. I send cards. I will go and, I'll order them now on Amazon often, I'll be honest, but I still order the cards and send the cards, especially now, right? Not only the digital world, but the fact that so many people haven't been able to have services because of everything going on.
So Joan is sharing a comment in the chat room, and she says, death of my mom was an inflection point. It made me take stock and evaluate what I was doing and why. And Deb has just shared, I think part of that is older. I don't have enough time for the people I love, so I'm not going to waste time with people who are not important and supportive in my life.
Yes. So both of those comments are so important. The inflection and the causing of pausing and saying, am I doing and spending time where I want to, right? And am I at a place in my life that I want to be, right? And that reflection is so important. Not only that, the reflection of the time spent with our loved one before they died and how valuable that often is. To the second comment, I agree completely. Life gets shorter all the time the older we get. And I'm the same way. I have a friend that I've had for many years, 30 years. I don't know what has gone on with her over the last 5 or 6 years, but she just is getting cranky or something. She's not as nice as she used to be. And we've been friends, you know, for most of our lives. I'm at a point now where if I have time for a phone call or a Zoom call or a text message, she's not the person that I'm reaching out to. Because she's got issues, which we won't go into that, but I gravitate and want to spend time with people who are loving and kind and who are giving back to others. What I value in a person has really changed over the years. And I think that when we look at time and we look at how short life is in general, plus the time that might be left in our own lives, it is important to choose who we're spending that time with. You know, the other thing too is I think that when we're younger, we don't realize we can make those choices. And that's something that I think comes with age, where we think, you know what, we can decide who's in our life and who's not. And it's a little harder with family, but with friends, it's not as hard, right? Any other comments, Denise?
I just want to mention something about the friend thing too. It's interesting to think as we get older, we realize that moving on from a friendship doesn't have to be dramatic.
Right.
I think maybe it's because we're girls. I don't know. There's always the drama around the friendships, but now you just kind of feel like, in your case with your friend, you're just like making a different choice. It's a different choice.
It is. Oh gosh. Oh, I appreciate that laugh. I needed that laugh today because it's been a long pandemic, if you will, right? But yes, you're absolutely right. This friend of mine is a good example. We don't need to have a big drawn out anything. I'm just spending my time elsewhere, right? Oh gosh, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to see what else. I think I only have a couple things left here, and then we could just have some conversation. I want to talk for a moment about meaning. How many many of you have heard of meaning making? And it's a construct that Bob Niemeyer has done a lot of research around, but I think the finding meaning out of the death, or finding meaning out of the long-term caring for somebody, finding meaning out of somebody struggling with the disease can be one of the gifts. And for most people, it doesn't come overnight. So if this hasn't happened to you, please just know that we're all different. For me, one of the ways that I've actually been able to live a good life where I find joy often and contentment often is I have found meaning in my parents' death. My sister also died by suicide a few years ago. So I just have one sister left. And even through all of that, knowing that I'm helping other people in their honor has given me so much meaning. So I always want to bring this up too, because the meaning is different to every single person. And it doesn't have to be an entire career change, right? It doesn't have to be these sweeping things that you do or change because somebody has died. They can be very small things that are meaningful to you. And it could be, something that your loved one said to you that you're passing on to someone else, where you're finding meaning. I'm wondering if anybody wants to share, and I'm keeping an eye on the time, Denise, but if anybody wants to share about some meaning that they found after their loss, especially if there was something surprising, or you found meaning where you didn't think you'd find it. How have you found meaning?
May I ask how old you were when your mom died?
For me?
Yeah.
I was 29 when my mom died, and I was 25 when my dad died.
Okay.
Why did you ask?
I you know what? I'm just putting the timeline of your life together in my
Okay.
head. That's all. That's all. And Jill has shared in the chat room. She's writing, when my little sister died, our whole family became closer. An estranged couple got reunited, and we all communicate more often now.
Okay, so your family has come together and
Wow.
and they're closer. I'm so glad to hear that, because so often in families the opposite happens, where the death tears everybody apart. So I'm so glad to hear that. I love that. And you said an estranged couple came back together. That's great to hear. Any other comments? Or
I just want to mention that tomorrow night, one of our presenters is going to talk about finding her voice, and it's very similar to the theme that you just talked about in terms of finding meaning. Her voice really didn't come for her until years after the death of her father-in-law, years after her caregiving experience ended. And I think it's so important that we give ourselves the time for the meaning in our voice to feel like we found it, that it's not an instant, 6 months later we have it. Sometimes it just takes us a little bit to figure it out.
I agree with that. And I think with meaning, that is one of those things that does come with time. And certainly, none of us are fans of, well, it just takes time. But certain things do emerge over time in different ways that surprise us. And I agree with you. It could be a couple of years, it could be much longer. And we don't always know when that is. Yeah.
I'll share one more comment from the chat room, and it's from Gail. She writes, before being a caregiver, I always felt I was doing what I loved, being a stay-at-home mom. And then afterward, decided to go into nursing.
Oh. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Gail. And that's a prime example of, meaning making and making meaning after your loss, but also I would say growth and change and new purpose in life. Becoming a nurse is quite a commitment. And thank you for sharing that. Let's see, I think I just maybe have a couple more slides here. We've already touched on this, but just the things we learn about ourselves might be some of those gifts that come from our grief. Things that we learn about ourselves and ways that we learn that we're able to adapt and cope in ways that we never thought that we could. And how often have you heard people say, I'm stronger than I ever thought I could be? You know, let's see. And then, so yeah, this is actually my last slide. Have any of you found other gifts that you haven't mentioned yet that you would say come from your experience or from your grief? Maybe a way that you're living your life now, or how you might be helping others, or ways that you're remembering and honoring your loved ones. The other night at our Compassionate Friends conference, we had a candle lighting, and you wouldn't think that a virtual candle lighting would be that meaningful, but it really was very meaningful. So, if there's any comments there, Denise? Or
I think people are still typing.
okay.
And I'm thinking about a gift I think of that I received from my grandmother, which is the gift of just always being present. It was very difficult to have a relationship with her. And I really didn't have a relationship with her until she was 95. And so I spent the last 2.5 years with her. And I gave her another chance when she was 95. I thought, I don't know her. She's not going to live forever. I've got to learn her life story. And what happened then was this relationship developed with her, which really becomes this treasured friendship that I think of. Wow. And it's this idea that you just stay present to the relationship, that it can change and evolve over time.
Yes.
And that it can become something powerful. And I just say, as an aside, it also helped that she went on antidepressants.
Okay, that was part of the story that
was, yes. So it wasn't just like she woke up one day and said, oh, I'll have a relationship with my grandchild. So there was some help. But anyway, I was open to it. I was present for it and took advantage of the opportunity.
You showed up, right?
Yeah, right. Yes, I showed up. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
One of my favorite expressions anytime with anyone, under any circumstances, is the idea of meeting people where they are. And it sounds like you did that with her, and that ended up being a gift for you.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. In a way that is very touching for me now when I think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we haven't heard from anybody else in the chat room, so I think they're good.
Yeah.
They might probably be reflecting on it, because it's such a great question for us to think about.
Yes, yes. And just even how our life has changed. Well, and I appreciate all of you being here this evening. And Denise, I appreciate you having me. I thank you for that.
Yeah, this was wonderful. This was wonderful. It was very calming. And the ability for us to receive your words and then reflect on them is quite powerful. So if anybody has any last questions or thoughts, please feel free to unmute yourself or share them in the chat room. We do have just a couple minutes left.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I do tend to, when I talk about this topic, talk about hope for the future. Hope for the future is also one of those things that can be elusive. And I like to weave it into conversations, because sometimes I think we have to give ourselves permission to have hope. I see some comments popping in. My toolbar popped down.
Yep. Yeah, and they're saying thank you. This was really helpful. Yeah, they're giving you their gratitude.
Oh, well, you're welcome. You're welcome. And I hope everybody is able to have a peaceful evening, and that you're not too affected by any storms that are on the East Coast still.
Or storms personally, right? Yeah.
Or exactly. Our own personal storms. Yeah.
Yeah, this was wonderful. Thank you so much, Pamela. It's really great to spend this time with you. We so appreciate all your wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I wish you, great time with the rest. I think you have one more day tomorrow with your...
We have a day tomorrow, and then we just have a short 2 sessions on Friday.
Great. I'll try to pop in where I can.
Yeah, that'd be great. We'd love to have you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Have a good evening. See you tomorrow.
Bye.